Welcome, fellow plebs. My name is Sean, and this is
Tribunus Plebis.
Welcome back, everybody. And today we want to talk about the Amazon Labor Union affiliating itself with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. This all started, this whole scenario, about 2 weeks ago when the Teamsters Union announced that they had come to an agreement with the ALU to become affiliated. This affiliation would help the ALU organize at JFK 8, and it would help the teams, or I guess it would help the ALU expand itself across the country using some of the Teamsters resources. This particular local, the first local that they made, was for a building in New York on Long Island called JFK 8. Is like the location code for it, right? JFK 8. They had voted for and created the ALU. It was born in JFK 8. It's where the entire union was created, and it's where the first local is. And its goal was not just to organize JFK 8 locally, it was also to expand throughout New York and across the country and organize Amazon. Now, this announcement was met with a lot of pushback from the members of the ALU, such as that they are. Since it was the Teamsters who announced it, that was kind of a big sticking point for people. But more importantly, it was because there had been no vote, which was required and which was agreed to by the union, by leadership, and by the Teamsters. So the primary issue, or I guess I should say that, I guess both current leadership who negotiated this deal and the Reform Caucus both support the affiliation, but the Reform Caucus was upset how it was announced and when it was announced, being before the vote. The primary issue, like I say, to the reformers was that there was no vote yet. It was announced before the vote. Now, they have since had the vote. Almost 900 people showed up. I think it was like 870, something like that, maybe 857, now that I'm thinking about it. But mid-800s, pretty good turnout, better than I expected. I thought maybe 400 or 500, if they were lucky, would show up, but they did a good job. They got 850, 870 out to vote. That's pretty significant, I think. And it passed with over 98% of voters voting yes. Now, personally, I've been kind of leery about the ALU, not in the sense of like the ALU itself, but just in the fact that I thought that they would need to at some point affiliate with a bigger union, and it looks like they definitely are, and we'll see if it ends up being a good thing. So, will it be good? Will it be bad? Will it be neutral? Will it not make a difference? Will nobody care? Well, when I'm thinking about this, I guess kind of the first thing that I would talk about is where the Amazon Labor Union is right now. Or what, well, I guess they're still there. I was going to say or was, now that they're affiliated, but they're still in the same position. The basic problems remain, really, since the key parts of the agreement, at least that we've seen, was that the Teamsters would not be on the hook for any of ALU's financial obligations, none of their debts, none of their payables, none of the money coming to them. It's a totally separate entity. And that all leads me directly to the Amazon Labor Union was financially broke, or is financially broke, and they have been and remain, at least up until this recording, unable to get Amazon to the bargaining table, right? They're broke and they can't get Amazon to even talk to them. And that's about it. I mean, those are two really huge issues. Now, the first thing, the being broke part, that seems to have surprised a lot of people. I guess that they view this as, they nominally represent like 5,500 workers at JFK 8. How can they not have any cash on hand if they have 5,500 members? But the thing is, of course, for anyone who doesn't know how all of this works, the union members do not pay any they do not pay any dues to the union, which is where the union would typically get all of its money. They don't pay dues until they get that first contract. So if there is no contract, the union receives no funds for representation. So a lot of people were left to wonder how they've managed to, fund themselves up to this point. Well, the answer is that they have been surviving off of donations and gifts. Most of it from one place, the International Commission for Labor Rights, which is a New York-based nonprofit. ICLR donated $425,000 to the ALU, and another $275,000 came from other donations for a total of close to $670,000. But all of that money, everything that went to ALU that they used for anything that they paid for, was all gifts and donations. Now, since the union can't collect dues until they get a contract, then they have no money without these donations. In fact, the ALU is in fact broke even with these donations, and they are even in debt. Even, like I said, even counting all of the donations, they're still behind. And this is according to their latest financial reports, which came out in April. They're even in arrears with their landlord by several months, at least 3 months. This is, of course, all a part of Amazon's plan here to push this thing out until the ALU just had no more money left, no more enthusiasm from the workers, and the whole thing just falls apart. Now, as an example, the trucking company that I work for, I'm a truck driver. I drive a truck for a living, right? My company did this exact same thing with our Miami facility, which unionized itself. They dragged it out so long that between turnover and apathy, eventually it just destroyed the solidarity which had existed there, and the union fell apart. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. I'll go into it a little bit more detail when it, connects more directly with the story here. But these are classic corporate stalling tactics, which this Teamster affiliation will, we hope at least, help curb. Now, for the ALU, I guess this isn't even really the half of it. There is internal strife as well. Now, certainly some of this strife and issues have to do with the inability to not just get a contract, but even to begin bargaining at all. But they are also due to the poor financial situation. Now, I just want to say that I am no financial expert here. I'm not an accountant or anything like that. So then this next part, I have to admit that some of it might be above my head. I might be misreading something. But we're going to look at the financial statements from Amazon Labor Union right here. And I'll throw them on the screen so you can see them. So there's a lot of kind of normal stuff here, like rent, union activities, whatever, those might be, organizing activities, lawyers' fees, and so on. There are also salaries to the board, including for Chris Smalls. They average roughly around $30,000, with Smalls earning a stated $25,000. He also seems to have donated $31,000 at the end of 2023 back to the union, the highest paid employee made $45,000 according to this document in this period. There's stuff like paying for laptops, furniture, and rent, which I think I mentioned, all the normal things. Stuff like paying for, things like the laptop, furniture, rent, all kind of normal. Until you're looking for income, it's all donations. Now, they also spent a total of over $700,000 as of April 1st of this year, or I actually believe this report is for 2023, but was released April 1st. Sorry about that. But they spent $25,000 more than they received in donations. So when I look at this report, the one category I can't suss out exactly what it is representational activities, because I just don't know what it means, to be honest. Is that spending money to force Amazon to the table? I hope it is. I hope it's spent to organize and, talk to the members of the organization, of the union. Or is it money spent on superfluous trips to various locations around the country for photo ops, or sort of talking to workers but not really doing much to organize? Is it used for things that have little or no benefits to the workers? I don't know. And just as an aside, this sort of sorry, before I an aside here, I know that it didn't happen last week, it didn't happen recently, but it did happen last year. And this is the trip to Cuba that Chris Smalls and I believe some other leadership took. Was this money used for that? I don't know. But, maybe I shouldn't even speculate on it, to be honest. But I know that some Amazon workers who this union represents sort of resent that they have no contract. There's no bargaining going on. There's no real organizing going on. But meanwhile, they keep seeing their leadership pop up across the country for photo ops, and even ends up in other countries. And, this just isn't a great look for a union. It's not a great look if you're trying to organize another building. It's not a great look if you're trying to keep the organization of the building you have going. It's not a good look if you're trying to get the workers in the building you've already organized on board with being in a union. And it's I guess it's sort of like a free inroad for Amazon to get to a decertification vote. It's a really easy way. It's I guess it's a slam dunk for Amazon to walk into a anti-union meeting and say something like, hey, look, this union is broke. The leadership is going all across the country, getting their photo taken with powerful people. They aren't even here. Some of your coworkers don't even really understand that they're in a union, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And the president of the union is in Cuba or Michigan or DC, or talking to, a warehouse in Idaho or something. And it's broke. That's an effective attack. That's a really effective message, because it's all true. Whether it's, I guess, it's like malicious, or maybe they just don't, the ALU just doesn't really know what it's doing well enough, or maybe it's just sort of normal things that just aren't working. It's a really effective attack from Amazon with the workers to get them to vote no. Now, like I said, some Amazon workers are upset about this. Just some, not most, not all. And that's kind of sad, because it's only some. It's not, or because it's not most. It's, it's sad that this years long delay to bargain is sapping the strength from the union. And just the other day, just to touch on something I said a moment ago, I read an article where the reporter was outside of JFK 8 talking to workers. And several of them said that they had heard that there was a union vote a while back, but that they hadn't really heard much about it since they got hired a few months ago. Now, if this is true, and I guess, I don't have any reason to doubt the reporter necessarily, but maybe they were interviewing people who lied a little bit because, union talk is still frowned upon so much. But if people who were hired a few months ago don't even really know that they're in a union, they're not really up on the vote, what's going on, that's not a good look. After all, one of the biggest issues with organizing a giant place like Amazon or even like fast food places is the turnover. It's the churn of humanity coming through. This massive churn and turnover, it comes from people quitting because they can't take it. They find better jobs. They get hurt. Amazon forces them on shifts that they can't work. Like whatever, the people get quit, they get fired, they get hurt, they move on, and so on, and new people come in. And you need to engage those new people. This ALU union came into being in a very specific situation, a very specific circumstance. I guess that they had their own very unique origin story, right? They had their own flashpoints, their own battles, their own issues, and these things were all their own. Workers hired 2 or 3 years later, they just don't have that material connection to seeing Chris Smalls get fired. They don't have the connection to how things were during COVID when all of this popped off, all of the hours, the working hard, the being afraid for your health, watching people get sick, seeing people die, hearing your friends are dying, seeing your friends get sick. They weren't there for the uproar. They weren't there for the organizing or the fight, right? The battle, the war, the win. These new people came in and they just wanted a job, and apparently nobody's reaching out, or they aren't reaching out hard enough. Now, was any of that, I think it was $300,000 in representational activities spent to continue organizing new workers or organizing already organized workers, right? You got to keep this up. If it wasn't, it's a missed opportunity, right? Because some of these guys who've been working there for 6 months haven't heard anyone talking about the union. That's a problem. So they either aren't doing it or they aren't doing it well enough, right? Maybe they're just doing it poorly. And when you look at how much turnover and how much time has passed in this warehouse, you have to wonder how much time and turnover does it need before this, the simple talking point of this so-called union is broke. They haven't done anything to help you, and they just want your cash to stay afloat, right? How long before that leads to a decertification vote? It's not far away, believe me. And how likely is it that when some large percentage of your coworkers who weren't even there for the initial organizing and campaign, and they have no connections directly to it, how long will they resist a decertification vote? How long will it be before somebody steps up and demands one? And this isn't some far-fetched stuff. Like I said, this happened at my company at the Miami location. It organized. It voted for a union. It even got a contract. All right, they got their contract, but it took 5 years to get that contract. And this location, it had a lot of turnover, had a lot of churn. This is a very common occurrence in trucking. Then a right-wing, right-to-work advocate law firm, of all things, right? They approached one employee, a single employee, who initiated a decertification vote and got enough people behind it that they won the vote. And now the union's gone. That's all it took. A drawn-out bargaining, a good but not super stellar contract, and a lot of turnover and time, and it all fell apart basically on its own. That outside influence, it definitely affected things, right? It was the final lever that popped it open. But man, that 5 years of bargaining, it was barely hanging on when they got the contract. All that time and turnover and pain and frustration, it really affects people. And this is literally what Amazon wants to have happen at JFK 8. And, I hate to say it, but it's not that far off. You can see it in the future if things don't change. And I don't say that because I have some sort of, inside info. I certainly hope that the ALU wins, that they get their contract, and that it's an awesome contract. I absolutely hope that they do. I only say this because this is how it has happened for hundreds of years at this point. This is how unions get drawn out, defeated, and decertified. It just is. It's happened countless times, and this is no different. If the ALU wants to avoid that, they need to get Amazon to the table now, like right now, as soon as they possibly can, because the turnover is just going to keep happening. Your hardest core supporters are going to start leaving for better opportunities, or just to get out because they're frustrated. And I feel like I got a little sidetracked there, and I apologize. So let's talk about why this affiliation could be a good thing, okay? So the first is money. It kind of matters here. It always matters. Money is important. And by reading the affiliation agreement, which I can put on the screen, it doesn't look like the Teamsters are going to directly fund the ALU like, some people I think kind of thought would happen. They won't resolve their debts or anything. And again, I'm not a lawyer or accountant or anything, but this is what I'm sussing out here. The money that does come from the Teamsters will hopefully reinvigorate the ALU, local number 1, JFK 8. One way it could help is by engaging the newer workers who may have been missed and to keep enthusiasm going. But the biggest thing it can do is to help get Amazon to the table. They need to actually bargain with these people. The other thing it can bring to the table is legal help, right? And while the ALU did have lawyers, and I'm sure they were fine lawyers, I'm not saying that they were bad, the Teamsters can certainly afford more and maybe even better lawyers. And this is literally what the Teamsters do, right? I'm sure that they have lawyers on staff, hopefully. But I think that having money is a very big lever to get Amazon to the table. The other thing it can bring is a ton, an absolute ton, a metric ton of organizing experience and the sort of on-the-ground manpower which this situation pretty much begs for. Like if I asked, I don't know, like the ALU, I think Secretary Treasurer was one of the positions. If I asked them, How do we get Amazon to the bargaining table? I'm sure that they would give me a solid answer, whoever they are. But I'm also fairly certain that some other relatively random member of the Teamsters leadership would be more able to actually get it done, even if they didn't have like a better technical answer. And this is no offense to the ALU secretary, treasurer, whoever you are. Like I say, I'm sure you're a wonderful person who understands their job. But the first real use of this new influx of money from the Teamsters is to actually fund the upcoming leadership elections. The money will, according to the agreement, quote, provide resources to effectuate an internal election for ALU IBT Local 1 in a manner so that potential officers may reach with equal access as many eligible members in JFK 8 as possible. End quote. The election itself is really something that the Reform Caucus is responsible for. Just another in a new and, growing line of reformers out there in the unions that have moved their unions in a newly democratic way. And this is hugely important. I give absolute 100% props to the ALU Reform Caucus for doing this. However, before the ratification by the... I skipped my note here. Oh yeah, I got you. So the ALU, it was supposed to hold leadership elections within 60 days of being certified by the NLRB. But right before the ratification by the NLRB, the current leadership, led by Smalls, they pushed a new constitution to the members, which delayed elections until they won the first contract. This is why many lost faith in leadership, or at least it was the first step to it. It wasn't just a lack of bargaining or a lack of a contract. It was a purposeful maneuver to keep themselves in power without an election, without democracy. The Reform Caucus fought for and eventually forced the current leadership to accept a democratic election. This is just another example of workers coming together for democracy in their union, which is very, very heartening. Now, talking about the election, it brings me to my most cynical take, or most cynical possibility, I guess, as to why this affiliation was sought for and signed right now, and why it was announced so early. And I say this with no inside knowledge. It's just a very cynical thought. But it strikes me that this could be a bit of self-serving for the current leadership. They were pressed and forced. And I think that it's worth repeating that they were forced into this election by the Reform Caucus. And the election includes, a new president and new leadership board. And this just seems, again, cynically, that it could have been pushed for, at least in part, to get the current leadership a big win right before the election. Especially with the Reform Caucus coming out and fully endorsing the affiliation, fully agreeing, at least in principle, on the affiliation with the Teamsters. The only criticism that the Reform Caucus really had was that they were upset about who announced it and that it was announced before the vote. Now, that support by the Reform Caucus, it just gives current leadership the ability to say things like, look, we got you I guess they can say, we got you this affiliation with this massive union, and it was something that even my opponent here wanted, but we got it for you. right? It's a win on all ends for the current leadership in an election. I don't know if it's going to throw anything. I don't even know if it was intentional, but that's just, my conspiracy brain going off saying, that seems kind of fishy on the timing about this, right? So we have money, experience, ability, manpower, expertise, lawyers, political influence. Did I say financial? I think I said money or something. These are all super important things. And I guess I should also note here that the Teamsters have been talking a lot about organizing Amazon since the original JFK 8 vote, probably even before that, but really it started in COVID. And while they may have made some small headway, they did organize drivers at a third-party delivery company in Texas, I believe. And I think they might have organized a few other ones around the country, but they're kind of making these small steps, all good, but all small. And as far as I'm aware, Teamsters directly haven't made any major inroads, major wins yet that at least I'm aware of. And that's just to say that the experiential, organizational, political, and financial might of a massive international union doesn't always guarantee wins. It doesn't guarantee victories across the board. You can still lose and be a big union. And so I guess that brings me to the flip side. What could the ALU lose with the Teamsters, right? We've talked about the good things. What could go wrong? What will they lose? And is it all worth it? Well, they would certainly lose their independent character. They'd become part of a very large international union, a union that has a lot of internal bureaucracy, right? A lot of issues that they have to deal with. A union which has had some very real, very questionable, and very recent issues. A union which partially overcame a lot of those issues with an internal revolt, again, by another reform caucus. And that revolt created a more democratic election system, which resulted in Sean O'Brien being elected to lead them. Now, I have my criticisms of O'Brien. His playing footsies with Republicans and Trump being the primary one right now, I don't like it. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a glaring mistake. To steelman it, I would say that he's, like right now, he's fighting to speak at the Republican convention. I don't necessarily think that's like a horrific thing to do. If you're going there and not supporting Republican elected officials, if you go in there and you just say, listen, we're a union. We believe in workers uniting together to fight against corporations. The leadership of this party, right? The senators, they're all fighting against us. They're garbage. This guy running for president, he hates us. He's garbage. But we wanted to talk to you anyway. Something like that, like combative. This is what we do. We're unions. We don't agree with all these other people on stage. I'd be fine with that, at least in theory. I don't know if it's a good idea to go to these things at all, but at least in theory, I can support something like that. I'm just not very trustful that O'Brien will do that. So this independence that they'd be losing is maybe the biggest loss in something like this, in this sort of affiliation. But being indie also has a cost, as we've seen, as we've talked about. Just that inability to actually get that contract. A lack of funding is truly important. It's truly a big deal. You do need money to organize, especially from the outside. There's also the knowledge of just what to do. how to do things better, things at work that are slightly off of the technically correct things. And I don't mean like breaking rules, but the book might say approach it in this way, and people who've organized like a warehouse that's similar to Amazon with a lot of turnover, a lot of low paid workers, a lot of like shift issues, safety issues. They just know specifically how to shoehorn themselves in there and actually talk to people and convince them. They know what needs to be done, right? What is extraneous? Does visiting Cuba help organize a warehouse in New York? Does it help get Amazon to the bargaining table? Does going to DC? It might not. People with experience can probably tell you like how it's helpful and how it isn't. They can, if you send somebody experienced to DC, they know who to talk to. They know exactly where to go, who to talk to, how to talk to them, and how to come back with hopefully a win in their pocket. You don't just go to babble to random people and get your picture taken, right? You go there with a plan, you attack it, you do it. Does going to like Delaware, right, and to an Amazon warehouse and hosting workers at I guess maybe not at a bar, at a bowling alley, say. I don't want to bring booze into this, but maybe like a bowling alley or just a meeting hall. And handing out pamphlets that, cover the rights workers have, the legalities involved, and how to approach fellow workers, whether for or against, or deciding, does that really work? Is there a better way to do it? I imagine that Teamsters organizers would know. Now, all that said, we did see an established union. I believe it was RWDSU, retail. It was the retail workers and it was the retail workers and department store union. They failed to organize an Amazon facility in Bessemer, Alabama, something we talked about on this podcast several episodes. Right? They actually failed twice. They got a second vote because the NLRB ruled that Amazon unfairly affected the first vote. And they still lost. So I guess, sorry for the dead air here. I was checking on something. I'm new to recording myself. It's kind of weird. So like I said, it doesn't, being affiliated with a massive union or actually being directly in a large union doesn't guarantee a victory, right? So if there is I guess a weakness with the coalescence of solidarity at a place like JFK 8, it's that I guess it is the uniqueness of it, right? JFK 8 organized on particular issues that are shared amongst all Amazon facilities for sure, right? Wages, hours, shifts, safety, stuff like that, working conditions, okay? They all share this. Everybody has issues where they work. But they had unique flashpoints that brought everybody together in solidarity. Things that made people angry and upset and anxious, and it just coalesced into this solidarity. That sort of fervor, which is born off of like very specific actions and conditions, is very hard, maybe even impossible to recreate anywhere else. At least I think that. Other Amazon workers certainly do feel oppressed. They feel mistreated, abused, overworked, unsafe even. They feel all of the general issues that affect Amazon workers everywhere. And those workers at whichever, other facility or warehouse or delivery drivers, they are probably either outnumbered by like workers against a union, or maybe it's like 50% of the workforce. They're really a minority or just on that line. And those places need something to push them over the top the way JFK 8 did. Except it has to be created in those warehouses, in their own culture. Okay? A person being wrongly fired at a Long Island warehouse probably isn't enough to get non-union workers on board and, get a victory at a suburban Chicago warehouse. Now, can ALU organize at other facilities? I don't know. Can the Teamsters? They probably can do a little bit better, honestly. And that doing better might just be advising ALU organizers better ways to approach workers, right? And a couple of years ago, it was after Chris Smalls and a couple of other people visited another warehouse. It was in the Midwest. I think it was near Chicago, but I might be wrong. But I read an interview, right, with one of the workers there who was leaning against a union. And he talked about how they came and sort of talked to them about what happened at JFK 8, about Mr. Smalls being fired, about the working conditions. It was during COVID and all the horrors of that, right? And he was able to easily blow it off because nobody had been fired or mistreated in those ways in Chicago. He couldn't relate to what happened in Long Island. That story, it carried no weight with Chicago workers. It carried no weight with, a warehouse worker in Illinois or Indiana or Michigan. It just doesn't. They didn't work next to somebody who was fired for organizing. They didn't work during COVID. Maybe their warehouse opened up after JFK 8. Amazon learned some lessons and it's a little better there. This happens all the time. Maybe this guy maybe the warehouse in Chicago was just as bad as JFK 8, but this guy only got there a year ago when it had been fixed or made a little bit better, made a little bit more humane. And the problem is that if you're organizing and the story that carries no weight in Chicago is the only story you have, then you aren't going to organize warehouses around Chicago. You just aren't. Because they just aren't going to care about it the way you do. They care about their situation. I mean, the win, the culture, the flashpoints, all the things that pushed JFK 8 over the top to form a union, they weren't even enough to make even a close vote at the second warehouse that the ALU tried to organize. And that building was literally across like a 4-lane road from JFK 8. They are, you can look on a map, they're directly across from each other, and they couldn't even get the fervor from JFK 8 a couple thousand feet across the road to the other Amazon warehouse. And, that might sound harsh. It might even be harsher than I really mean it to be. But that's just how it was. That's how it ended up. You can't organize other places based on what happened to you at yours. It doesn't work. Even at the peak of like labor movement strikes, new unions organizing, Starbucks starting to organize, all labor movements all across the country. And in that time, with all of the ALU pressure, during COVID, the peak of Amazon's shenanigans when there were stories about workers peeing in bottles in the warehouses, stories about delivery drivers pooping in the back of their vans because they just didn't have enough time to pull over somewhere. The ALU could not even get a close vote across the street from where they won. And while that sounds harsh, I think it's an important lesson. It's an important thing to think about. These other warehouses they're different than JFK 8. Not in the work that they do, not in how they're broadly treated, but just in what they directly see and how they're treated on the margins. Hell, the Bessemer building didn't even go ALU, right? They went with the Retail Workers and Department Store Union. An uprising at one building does not in and of itself help organize another. It might inspire another building, but in the end, that other building needs to be successfully organized from within, from their own culture, from their own issues. And who is more able to take advantage of that? I guess that's the last question about ALU or ALU affiliated with the Teamsters. Which of those two things, ALU independently or ALU with the Teamsters, is more able to help places organize from within? And I can't say that I personally have the best answer. I'd love to say independent ALU all the way. But I've always believed, kind of in my heart of hearts, in the back of my mind, that they'd have to hook up with a bigger union somewhere, as well. So in the end, the workers of ALU have spoken. They've said, yes, we want to affiliate with the Teamsters. They've decided. And they also get to choose their leadership going forward. And I hope that they listen to both sides. And I hope that they make the right decision. So as always, solidarity to all. Solidarity forever. Thank you. I love you all.